Hi everyone, welcome to the feature tour of version 1.4.0 of the OneGrade plugin. So the short version here is we've included a neural network in the plugin to help understand what's in your scene and build a base grade off of that. So it's a really exciting change. To quickly explain how we came here, it's helpful to know that in earlier versions of the plugin, we had a base grade and creative grade option. And when we did that, we would use some fancy math to basically understand what your scene was from just like a pure color and tone perspective, and then try to give you a good either base grade, which would sort of even out your image, or a creative grade, which would make a sort of really fancy creative vision of what your frame was. And we do that using a film emulation LUT system that's built in Resolve, and the end result was something that's a little bit more fanciful. But the downside to both of these methods was they didn't actually understand what was in your scene. And so what I found myself doing a lot was using one of those two options, but then having to say, well, the thing I'm interested in is this face or this cluster of buildings. And then using my information and knowledge about what the scene is, making tweaks to the grade. And that's what the new version is hopefully going to help make faster. So whenever you press the magic grade button, we run your image through a neural network to understand the contents of your scene. And then based on that, we're going to identify those main subjects, run it through a classifier, and then apply a grade based on what that object is. So for example, if you have a face, it'll detect the skin tones, it'll detect a face, and then it attempts to make that object the center point of your frame. And we'll do that with things like lift gamma gain adjustments, but then also your tone and your look. So in other words, we'll try to do like teal and orange, or if you have buildings, we'll try to add contrast. So it is a scene aware way of creating a grade. And the whole point and purpose is to make it easier to get you quicker to that starting place where you can just add finishing touches to your grade. And we'll take a look at it right now so you can see it in action. But OneGrade is all about saving you time, not about creating a finished product, though we're getting close to be able to create that finished product for you. And this is a big step forward. So let's take a look at the plugin itself. And then on the outside, we'll talk about some of the future plans for this particular feature and the plugin itself. All right, so let's hop in and take a look at the new version of the plugin here. So here is a good example of what our plugin is now trying to solve with the Magic Grade option. So you'll find it here under Magic Grade. Quick operational note, this has an additional feature that's not yet released called Subject. We'll talk about this in a second, but this makes the process even, I think, more powerful. But let's just start with the basic idea. So I have this scene. Here's the raw image as it comes in. Here's it's graded. What I've tried to do here is add blue to the ocean. We have this beautiful sunset in the background. There's competing elements here, but it has beautiful separation because the water is blue, the sky is red, and this is a nice looking shot, plain and simple. So how do we achieve that? Well, we have the same version of the shot, only without anything done to it. So by default, when we add OneGrade, we get a base version of our grade. So we're trying to keep things neutral by not going too extreme. So the initial version that you get here is just a camera decode. And in this case, we default to Rec 2100 PQ. Now this was shot with an Alexa, so you could just say log C3 and you get something like this. But what we've done very specifically is try to adjust the tonal range so that it is now up to us to decide what we want to do with this image. We could manually change lift, gamma, and gain. There's absolutely no problem with that. It needs to work the same as what the existing sliders in Resolve do. But what we want to do is make our lives easier. So we have base grade, which is going to add a little bit more punch to the image, but it's actually, in this case, going to dial down our tonal range so that we can be even more aggressive with our lift, gamma, gain. We have creative grade, which adds the Kodak 2383 LUT. And at this point, we have our bias slider. We've covered this in previous videos, and this gets us really close to the target image. But notice the difference here. So in our previous version of the plugin, we would add the creative grade. But now notice that we don't quite have the separation between the sky and the ocean. And the very obvious difference here is the ocean is blue, and we've added more blue into the ocean. So there was no way of doing this. But now with Magic Grade, there is. So let me reset the grade, and let me click the white balance first and the Magic Grade button. What this is going to do is it's going to do the same basic premise that we had before, where it creates a starting point for us. But now we have two sliders. We have separation and we have bias. bias operates the same, and you'll even see it moving the same slider as we had right here. But now notice that it's a little bit more targeted because we're making a more advanced pass at our look. So we're already pretty darn close with a single slider adjustment that we had before. But now here's the key. What we've done with our magic grade is we've identified the elements in our scene. And we've actually used a neural network to say what's in here, and it says, there's water and there's sky. There's obviously other elements, but the major elements are water and sky. And it's actually rated how much there are. So now we can say, I want the water to be the main subject, and our separation is going to dial in separation based on what that object is. And now look at how we're able to draw out the blue of the ocean without having to wonder what we should draw out of it. So again, here's our base grade by hand, and here's power grade. So I can dial some blue in, drop my bias a little bit further, and now we have essentially an identical image to what we had before, only the separation slider did the intelligent thing for us to say the object I want to create separation for is water, and so therefore I'm going to, in this case, adjust offset temp. So notice that as I move separation, it moves offset temp. That's what we did manually before, but now we don't have to guess. We just move separation and it creates that separation for us. So that's the power of this object. Let's take a look at another example. So here we have the city scene, again, this Alexa 65 footage. So if we go back to our base, we'll do the same process before, add the base decode on here, and then we'll use white balance and magic grade. Now there's something important that you're about to see, which is we do look for subjects, and depending on the frame that you're currently landed on, we may not actually find a subject. In this case, we actually didn't. So notice it says no subject to separate, so we've just applied creative grade. So what we want to do in these cases is move it so we can hopefully find a subject, and then click magic grade again. And now this time, it's actually going to identify the various objects in my scene. So it has built-in ground. And again, it has percentage based on how much it sees of it. So it says 62% of the scene is built, 36% is ground. And the beautiful thing is now if I choose ground, it's actually going to give me a completely different grade based on that parameter. So it's trying to create separation either from the buildings in the ground or the ground in the buildings. And so it gives us two different grading starting points based on what our subject is. So if I wanted to match our previous shot, I would select ground, I drop my bias, probably drop it even more. And notice here that it's a little bit more red. It's very easy now to use the separation slider to dial that in. And now we have a very similar shot to what we had before. So again, making our lives easier by finding the thing that creates separation and just literally putting it to a slider. Another beautiful scene here. This is from Blackmagic's website. So OneGrade, initial, white balance, magic grade. Here we're actually going to find three elements. So we're going to find sky, foliage, and water. And again, we can choose these to change the grade. So foliage is going to bias more towards green. Water is going to be more blue. And then sky is going to be a combination of both of them. So very easy to quickly flick between these and start your base grade. And at this point then I can use bias and separation to change these parameters as I see fit. Finally, the last thing I want to take a look at is another aim of this plugin is to make working with challenging scenes easier. So in this case, this scene was shot pretty dark. Notice that very little of this comes above 384. Now granted, this is the raw footage, but even when we drop in our base LUT, and even if we change this to the camera type that it is, which was Blackmagic Gen 5 film, very little of this again sits above sort of like middle gray area. So it's a very dark scene. So part of what we've done is try to add logic that makes bringing detail out of dark scenes better. Now this is not yet perfected, but when I click magic grade, it's going to identify the subject. So it's identified skin, and it's now trying to create separation between those two. The reason why I say it's not perfected yet is now this is a pretty crunchy image. The beautiful thing is though, is we can use magic grade in concert with other controls. So for example, gamma's a little bit high here. So if I just drop it down, I could start taking some of the edge off this image. And now I can get myself back to a place where I feel comfortable with this image. And this is a really nice result considering how dark we started. But again, it's doing so in a way that it's trying to create, again, separation between my foreground and background. And it starts us at that place, and then we can tweak around that. So we don't have to use, in other words, Magic Grade by itself. We can use it in concert with the tools that we already have. All right, so that is the version 1.4.0 of OneGrade. So what I want to take this next is to do like a mood simulation as well. So when I have something like this, a talking head, I'm not looking for a really dramatic shot. I want something where I'm mostly evenly lit and just sort of like a little bit lifted. And I want to create that as a preset. And then same with more dramatic looks, or if you have scenery, things like that. So the idea will be that once we perform the analysis and the classifying your scene, we'll then use that information and run it through a second classifier to determine how do you create sort of like a more dreamy look or a more serious look, or that sort of stuff. So that should be an interesting exercise. And again, it should help you more quickly get those results that you want. The other thing I want to do with this is make it a little bit more intelligent when it comes to things like dealing with really bright highlights and helping you recover more of your image through your roll-off. And then when you have really dark scenes, doing an even better job of retaining a lot of that detail. So both are things I think are going to be really handy in the future. Finally, as far as the plugin itself is concerned, right now it is OneGrade. I've been tossing names around a lot. We're going to change the name of the plugin to OpenGrade soon. I don't know if we're going to do it in this version, maybe in 1.6. But the idea is the more I work with this and the more I'm sort of caught up in the idea of this is an open source grading plugin, and it's always going to be, I want to capture that spirit more. And so we'll be renaming the plugin. Though if you have an idea for the name or something that would be interesting, please let me know. It's an open source plugin. We could certainly, entertain some other ideas. But I think for now, I really like the idea of OpenGrade. It is grading that is open source. So yeah, that's version 1.4.0. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.